It's Monday, June 23rd, for the Transportation Planning Environment Committee, and we have just a one-item agenda today. And so before we get into that, we are going to go ahead and make introductions. We have a couple committee members online. I think we have Mr. Driggs is still going to come down to the room here. He's not here quite yet. Mr. Winston's not able to attend. So why don't we go ahead and just have the committee members introduce themselves. I'm Julie Eiselt, Mayor Pro Tem, Chair of the committee, and we'll go to our two council members online.
Larkin Eggleston, Committee Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, Matt Newton, Committee Member.
Thank you. And then we'll go ahead with staff if you want to start on this side.
John Lewis, Executive Director of CATS.
Andy Mock, Senior Project Manager for the Link Silverline Project.
Kelly Goforth, Interim Director of Planning and Development for CATS.
Taiwo Java, Manager's Office.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Liz Baxton, Director of Transportation.
And Alexander, CDOT.
Thank you. So with that, our one item is the Silver Line Airport alignment and the 11th Street alignment. And I will just turn it over to John, unless Ty, you had some comments to make first?
No, Mayor Pro Tem. I think we can go to John.
Take it
Very
away.
good.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm John Lewis, Executive Director of the Charlotte Area Transit System, and with me are Andy Mock, who is the Project Manager for the Silver Line, and Kelly Goforth, who is Interim Director of Planning and Project Development. And they are really the power behind the the Silver Line Planning and Design Study, along with our Transit-Oriented Development Study. The Silver Line project team did a great job moving this project forward during the pandemic. Next slide, please. With multiple virtual community meetings in each of the project focus areas, that was set to solicit input from communities on alignment alternatives in the midst of the change from in-person meetings, which our first public meeting was held in person, to pivot quickly to the online environment and virtual environment in which we've been operating over the last year. But more specifically, we were last before the TAP committee in May presenting the transit-oriented development study on station area planning. Next slide. The project team developed a framework for evaluating the many alignment alternatives identified by the project team and from community input. That framework identified the benefits and risks associated with each alignment alternative based on specific criteria that you see on the slide. From a benefits standpoint, we looked at items such as, did the particular alignment enhance travel time along the corridor? Did it promote economic development and transit-oriented development? And does a particular alignment alternative provide access to major destinations and enhance connectivity of the transit network? Then the project team weighed those potential benefits with the risk associated with implementing a particular alignment alternative. Did a recommendation increase dependency on other projects, other third-party projects, such as highway projects, both at the local and state level? What was the impact of that alternative to capital and operating costs? And could an alignment, particular alignment alternative, pass environmental screening? Next slide. During our last presentation to the committee in May on the transit-oriented development study, questions were raised by committee members about particular segments of the locally preferred alternative that was passed by the Metropolitan Transit Commission earlier this spring. There were questions about the airport station, the 11th Street corridor, and the Blue Line connection, and the Woodbury Forest portion of the alignment. So I'd like to take a few minutes to this afternoon to address those questions and explain the rationale behind the alignment choices. CATS has been working with the airport over the last several years to ensure that there is close coordination between the Silver Line development and the airport master plan development. The goal of this coordinated effort is to ensure that we leverage the investment in these mega projects to maximize development potential of the airport's destination district, along with ridership goals of the Silver Line project. A station at Destination District allows the Silver Line to serve not only the airport and the primary ridership market of workers at the airport, but also allows us to continue westward to a critical park and ride location at I-485 and eventually connect to the town of Belmont in Gaston County, making this a regional project of significance. Next slide. There's been questions about why the alignment also doesn't connect directly to the main terminal of the airport. Beyond the issues I just explained, there are multiple potentially fatal flaws in attempting to directly serve the terminal. First, an alignment into the terminal would have to elevate bridge over the Norfolk Southern Freight Railroad, thereby creating a hazardous condition in the path of one or more runways. In the slide you have here, the red areas that are outlined are the actual runways, and along with their flight paths beyond the runways. And you'll see the purple line towards the top of the photo shows the Wilkinson Boulevard corridor where the Silver Line would transverse along the locally preferred alternative. Making that left turn, no matter where we make that along this corridor, in order to access the main terminal, which you see in yellow there between the two runways, would cause us to have to elevate, as I said, over the Norfolk Southern the freight rail line, which you see in purple there, or conversely tunneling under that corridor, which would also add significant costs to the project and still create a potential security concern in relation to blast radius and other security issues and protecting the railroad and runway assets. Next, there have been suggestions that we make a hard left turn at grade from Wilkinson Boulevard. It's kind of like cars do now to serve the terminal. It's doubtful that this could be achieved geometrically, but even if there could be, there's only enough space between the two parking garages, which you see identified, highlighted in yellow, for single tracks in and out of the terminal, thereby creating a single point of failure in our line. Imagine if a train broke down at this location or a signal malfunction for one reason or another, the entire Silver Line corridor would be brought to a halt. Lastly, a station at the terminal would require trains to retrace their route in order, if we could solve the other issues, to get into the main terminal. They'd essentially have to backtrack out, back out to Wilkinson Boulevard in order to continue west to the I-45 station and westward into Gaston County, or back east to serve Uptown Charlotte. Lastly, there have been brought up issues about parking. Number one, the concerns about our park and ride lot at I-485 taking away potential parking customers for the airport parking lots. We had solved that question, that concern, with the Blue Line extension opening. Our partners at UNC Charlotte had similar concerns about parking revenue being diverted from the campus to CATS parking garages during special events and student parking, and we were able to solve that concern by installing a rule that any cars that are parked in our garage overnight are charged $25 or more, depending on the time, in order to leave the garage. And so by installing a parking policy that provides a cost greater to than what is at the airport, we think we would sufficiently deter people from utilizing our parking garages solely for the goal of avoiding airport parking charges. Next slide. The project team also evaluated multiple corridors for the Silver Line to transit through Uptown Charlotte, including Trade Street at and below grade, and along with the 11th Street corridor. Trade Street was rejected for multiple reasons. At grade would require CATS to demolish the current Gold Line alignment through Uptown, triggering a federal payback of Gold Line funds and jeopardizing Phase 3 of the project. Tunneling through Uptown would significantly increase project costs, and depending upon the engineering of that tunnel, could potentially interrupt current Gold Line service and trigger the other issues identified with the at-grade traversing of Trade Street. Next slide. In terms of the 11th Street corridor, we also believe that that corridor provides CATS and the city the best opportunity for meeting the broader project goals for economic development, spurring transit-oriented development, and opportunities for affordable housing. This graphic shows the number of undeveloped or underdeveloped properties in the service area. The red properties are opportunity areas that are privately held, underdeveloped, or undeveloped, and the green areas are properties in those categories that are publicly held. Notice the number of green and red shaded areas north of Trade Street. Building along the 11th Street corridor, we believe, will catalyze development of these properties, both public and private. Next slide. To further illustrate this point, this graphic shows the area immediately surrounding the potential new station at the 11th Street and at the Blue Line station. Bringing the Silver Line along this corridor could spur the type of development, the type of transformational development equal to or greater than what we're working on currently for Gateway Station. Next slide. The design team, in concert with the transit-oriented development team, continue to work to refine station area locations and plans. The TOD study team has added a new consultant to their team, Strategic Economics, who will be tasked with looking specifically into the economic development opportunities that this alignment will bring in comparison to this Trade Street corridor. We hope to have preliminary results of their analysis by the end of July, and we'll be happy to come back to the TAP committee to share with you the outcome of their analysis. Next slide. And this shows another view of the outcome of the kind of detailed station area planning that the TOD study will be working on, and the kinds of plans that we're hoping that we believe it will deliver at the end of their process, the end of this calendar year or early next year. Next slide. A ULI study has also been discussed for this project. CATS has commissioned these studies for projects in the past, and we support the utilization of this important professional resource for the Silver Line. During the Blue Line extension, we commissioned a study for the Hidden Valley station of the Blue Line extension, and this ULI study provided very useful information in regard to how we built out and engineered that portion of the alignment. And we believe the best time for a Silver Line study will be at the conclusion of the TOD study, so that the study team has very specific plans from a station standpoint, from a station area plan that they can evaluate and make recommendations on at that point. Next slide. The Woodbury Forest portion of the alignment is one of the most challenging areas of the design. This area has developed significantly over the years, and we knew that there would be impacts to residential neighborhoods and businesses. The team examined multiple alignments, and quite frankly, there just weren't any alignments that we could come up with that had no impacts to neighborhoods, the environment, nor businesses. We looked at the McAlpine Creek area. Significant environmental impacts. We looked at Lamarca area, which had impacts to the neighborhood and residents, and the Independence alignment, which required major relocations of businesses along that corridor. And also, the Independence alignment was further away from the Monroe Road corridor, where most of the ridership would lie in this portion of the alignment. In short, I want to reiterate, there really is no perfect alignment that could be identified that would have no impacts to neighborhoods, environment, or businesses along the corridor. So we were left with choosing the best of what were very difficult options. CATS had, and to this effect, CATS had 3 rounds of public meetings with the community to present information and solicit their input. We met with Woodbury Forest specifically to mitigate their concerns with the alignment, and at the end decided to add a station to this portion of the alignment to at least provide additional benefits to the resident. We will continue, once again, this is not the perfect alignment, and we will continue to work with the Woodbury Forest community as we continue along the process to do our best to mitigate those inevitable impacts. Next slide. To that end, now that we have an alignment, it's critical that the design team move into detailed analysis of the environmental impacts of the current alignment and begin identifying and working with the community to develop mitigation measures. This is a multi-year process, and public outreach will continue during the entire process, and we commit to keep the community, neighborhoods, and individual property owners, where relevant, involved and communicated with during this portion of the continued design. Next slide. CATS has also commissioned an APTA peer review of the Blue Line extension following 15% design phase. The panel, filled with transit professionals from Denver, Salt Lake City, and Sacramento Transit, participated in that review and made several recommendations to the project, which enhanced the project and project delivery. CATS intends to commission a similar peer review of the Silver Line, once again at 15% design. When we are working to develop the scope of this review, as the TOD study recommendations can be included into that scope to give that group tangible goals and things to look at. Next slide. Finally, work continues to progress on both the design efforts of the end of the Silver Line and the transit-oriented development study. Information that the study will develop will be critical to the design team's efforts to advance the project. We have begun with workshops will begin in July and throughout the entire alignment as the TOD team continues to evaluate station locations, station areas, and working with the neighborhoods and communities on those broader goals to meet not only the mobility goals of the project, but also the economic development and housing goals of the project in consultation with the neighborhoods. I also mentioned earlier that this timeline, we've also instituted a specific economic development study done that was being worked on by strategic economic consultant team, and we're looking forward to their recommendations, and once again we'll be happy to bring that information back to the committee once it is published. And with that, I believe that concludes the presentation. If there are any questions, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to address those now.
Mayor Pro Tem, I forgot to mention that Stuart here from the airport is actually present virtually, so if there's any question with regards to the airport alignment, you might be able to pitch in as well. So
Okay, great. And I do see Mr. Winston on. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Winston. And Stuart, Mr. Hare, thank you for joining us. Does the committee have any questions? Mr. Eggleston?
Stuart's probably the best person to answer this, and it might not make a difference in terms of what we're able to do or not near the airport, but it looked like on that chart, if we can go back to the airport map.
That is slide 5.
Slide 5.
Yes, this one.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think it's called, Stuart, correct me, the Crosswind Runway. I see that on there. I thought we were taking that out of service over the coming years.
That's a great question, and thank you for it. 523, the Crosswind Runway, is being evaluated for decommissioning. It has not been actively used over the past couple of years, a couple instances due to weather, but is generally not used, and we are looking to decommission it. We are expecting to receive a record of decision on that closure in September. But at this time, until we have received that record of decision to close it, we do have to continue to keep it in our evaluations.
If it were to be decommissioned, would that make any difference? Maybe, I don't know if this is better for John then. Would that make any difference if that were taken off the map here in terms of our ability to get closer to the airport, or no?
Appreciate the question, and it really would not overcome the fundamental concern of crossing the Norfolk Southern freight line, nor would it solve the issue that we would have a length of track without any stations along it that would just be weaving itself through our various buildings and structures.
Thank you. That's all for right now, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, and I just asked our planning director to clarify which runway it is, so maybe if we could get that for everybody looking.
I think it's the diagonal one.
It's the diagonal one.
Oh, diagonal, okay.
The one
one
that
that's
you
not-
can't
yeah.
see, you couldn't see from the old tower. And so
Okay.
they're taking that out, they're putting a fourth parallel runway.
Yeah, instead of that one, okay. Okay, are you good, Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs, and then Mr. Winston, Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the way it's proposed right now, how does a passenger take public transportation to Uptown Charlotte,
From
the airport?
From the airport.
Yeah.
And so what is currently in the airport's master plan is a people mover out to the destination district area. And we would connect to that people mover seamlessly at our station. Someone could get on the light rail at the destination district station and head into Uptown.
So a people mover, is that like the train at Atlanta Airport? Or, you know,
I will defer to Stuart to see what their projected people mover will be.
Hey, Stuart, how are you?
I'm great. Good to speak to you, Councilmember Driggs. So the technology is rapidly evolving on this. One example you've identified, the train at Atlanta that connects between their various concourses. Similarly, at DFW, there is a air train there that connects between their services. JFK has one as well, a people mover that goes to the Jamaica station. So you take the subway out to the Jamaica station, then you get on the air train to go into JFK. And so there's multiple examples of where this people mover technology is utilized, but you did key on one of them. There's emerging technology additionally in this space as well for autonomous rubber wheel vehicles that would not be on a fixed guideway. And so there may be an interim solution that we look at to use initially where we have self-driving buses, essentially, that would be on a dedicated guideway. That is one technological solution that's out there. We were actually supposed to attend an event based off of this exact topic in April of 2020, and that event has yet to be rescheduled.
So as a passenger and not an expert, the way I look at this is our airport is pretty close to Uptown. So in other cities, you've got a long trip, expensive and possibly very slow, like Chicago, you know, forget about it. So I'm wondering if the difference between having light rail at the airport and having to take another leg to get in tips the balance in the minds of a lot of people towards, hey, I'll just call an Uber.
Sure. And I think, Mr. Driggs, you've hit on the really one of the other determining factors of why we would rather connect a destination. It is really the employees that are our ridership market. There are, correct me, Stuart, if I'm wrong, I've seen numbers, there are 10,000 employees at the airport. If I got...
We generally use 20,000.
20,000, even better. If I only got 10% of that ridership, if I got 5% of that ridership on a daily basis, that is more than getting 100% of the travelers in the Charlotte market 3, 4, 5 times a year. And so the employees, as we understand, and parking an employee, there is a transfer already set into most of the employees' trips. So you drive into an employee lot, you park your car, you get on a Charlotte Airport bus to your final destination. So that transfer is already embedded in their daily trip. So where we are most competitive is against the single occupant cars. People who are coming from all around Charlotte to work at the airport facilities. We believe that that is our target market for public transit, in that they are already used to that transfer from one mode to another.
So that actually represents more. I mean, I'm just thinking, we heard something like 45 million, was it, emplanements at Charlotte, 20% of the traffic is local. So you actually get more from the employees commuting than you could potentially from passengers.
I would say, and to the fact that you're right, even if you have people who are desirous of using public transit with 10 plus stations, depending on where you're coming from. But let's say you're living in Uptown, or you're a business traveler from Uptown. There are going to be 6, 7 stations between Uptown and the airport. The airport is only a handful of, 5 miles as the crow flies from Uptown. We don't really compete in that realm. You can probably drive or get a taxi faster than you can taking public transit, just because of the stops to embark and debark passengers on.
And there couldn't be, one of the things they did where I lived in Connecticut was they had a mainline commuter train, and then they had occasional service that went up to a little branch station near where I lived. So 3 or 4 trains in the morning would leave from there and go all the way into town, or there was a shuttle thing at other times that you could take and change at the junction. So there's no way, for example, to have light rail go out to the airport on occasional service and not necessarily make the detour to the airport en route to destinations further out.
Sure. While I think that if we could find a way to deal with the challenges that were laid out here, I think that would be possible. But again, you're making that kind of investment for, a handful of riders outside of the employees.
So the cost benefit doesn't.
Cost benefit, I'm not sure would work out.
Concerning 11th Street, this is a sort of like a Field of Dreams thing. If you build it, people will come. People are already there, down further south. So, and I remember hearing the discussions about a tunnel, and it's $1 billion more. But from a cost-benefit standpoint, are we clear that we're not getting actually better value for money by choosing what is, in other respects, probably a preferable route? Rather than doing the loop?
Sure. And so that's a great question, Mr. Driggs. I will give you the example of the Stonewall corridor. When I first started here in September of 2015, those were surface parking lots and dirt mounds. And the Stonewall station of the original South Corridor was originally envisioned to be a part-time station only for big events, conventions, et cetera. Now, look at the transit TOD development that has occurred there. In the last 5 years, that has turned into a top 5 ridership station pre-pandemic in our entire alignment. And there's not one parking space at that station. Because of the new development that has happened, we are getting more riders. And what is key, we're not just getting, when you're going for the commuter riders, which is, if you look at our 485 parking lot in the south and our UNC Charlotte parking rides, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, pretty much filled to capacity. Off-peak and weekends, tumbleweeds growing through our parking garages. But when you look at our Uptown TOD stations, we're not only getting their work trips, but we're getting their restaurant trips, we're getting their entertainment trips, we're getting their grocery trips. So there's much more utilization of those TOD stations than there are on commuter stations. If you're a commuter coming in and using our station, I get 2 trips. You get your morning trip and your evening trip, and all your other trips to the grocery store, to entertainment, to wherever else is done in your car, in your community. And so while I like my commuters, the TOD stations provide a much bigger economic ridership impact and provide a much bigger bang for the buck.
So I have a couple more, but if you others want to go, I'll come back.
Okay.
Hands up.
Yes, I had Mr. Winston and then Mr. Newton, and I have some questions.
I don't know. I actually didn't have my hands up, but I would say, to Mr. Driggs' kind of train of questioning. Of course, we get the emails all the time about parking and the ability for employees to get there. So this would obviously be a helpful solution to something that is a constant issue. I know that, Stuart might be even referring to 20,000 people that work in the airport. We know that around the airport as well, there are significant jobs that depend on it. There's something, I've heard a number that there are 250,000 jobs that depend on the airport. Of course, some of those are trucking and things like that. But this would obviously increase the ability for people to work on different places. And I would also say, myself from personal experience, not just growing up in New York City, but as a student who, from the age of 14 till I graduated, 1997 through 2007, whether it be from Boston to New York or from Davidson to New York, you have we have UNC, the most populous campus in the UNC system. So there's a population of folks that will need to utilize to get to this airport that we aren't even thinking of. While definitely, as it was said, maybe it's not that business traveler from Uptown, there will be a significant a local population of folks that travel will be much more equitable, affordable, and accessible than it has been in the past, because there are populations that just need to get to the airport that have very limited ways of doing this. And this is an exciting thing. I hope that autonomous people mover event gets rescheduled. So that is a very interesting concept to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Mr. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm still a bit confused after our last meeting. It seemed to be indicated to us then that the council would not be voting on this alignment. And I just wanted to raise that question again. My first question here, are we as the council going to be asked to vote on this alignment? John, Ty?
I'm sorry, were you able to hear me, Councilman?
I could, no, I couldn't hear you.
Okay, the locally preferred alignment was established and voted by the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Yes, sir. And so there was no formal vote of the city council or any of the other government organizations along the alignment.
So we won't be voting on this, is what you're saying?
Not on the alignment, sir. No, sir. On the funding, that comes to, yes.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. So we as the council will be voting on the funding of the determined alignment.
That's correct.
Okay. And my subsequent questions are more specific to the Independence Monroe Road corridor alignment here, and even more specific than that to the Woodbury Forest area that you had mentioned before, John. You had said that disruption in that area, so I'm paraphrasing here, but disruption in that area is inevitable. And I know that there are still residents of the community that feel like they don't quite know what's going on. So I think it's important that we continue communications with them. And I feel like some of them haven't been contacted in a matter of months, and they have more recently reached out to me for answers. But really, it's about so their concerns are really about the backside of their community, Summerhill and Brian Williams Road, and how the alignment is going to abut, if not, frankly, take out some of the homes there. And I'm just wondering, you had mentioned that whatever we do, there would be either homes disrupted, there would be businesses disrupted. But in that short space or that area, it's simply some Hendrick dealerships on the back side there, and their parking lots are really what runs up against the community. And I'm just wondering why the alignment wouldn't be closer to those parking lots, if not potentially us working with Hendrick to just place the alignment over the parking lots. I don't know how that would disrupt business, and would certainly go a long ways towards not disrupting the community there. And I just wanted to get your comments on that, why the alignment wouldn't be closer to the backside of the Hendrick dealerships, or even we wouldn't work with Hendrick to place the alignment over the parking lots.
Sure. Councilman Newton, great question, very detailed. So I'm going to have Andy Mock, the project manager, join me here at the table to try and address your specific concern.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Newton, one thing to note is that whenever the Hendricks property came in for rezoning, they donated and provided the right-of-way that we're utilizing behind the back of Summerhill as a condition of their rezoning. So that right-of-way, and that goes back 2 or 3 years of time. So that right-of-way was donated as part of the council-adopted rezoning. And so we're occupying, the plan is for the Silver Line to occupy that right-of-way that was provided. We are, to your point about individual property owners, I've had many conversations with individuals in the Woodbury Forest, and we continue to do that. If there's specific folks that you'd like us to reach out to, I'm happy to do that. I think a lot of the folks who are reaching out to us have very detailed questions that, frankly, we're not to a place in our design that we can answer to their satisfaction. So the plan here is keep talking, but allow us to progress our design so we can more intelligently answer those questions and address those concerns that people are rightly raising.
Yeah, and I'll definitely connect you with folks that are reaching out to me, Andy. Having said that, I do feel like the concerns are legitimate, and the sooner that we can resolve those concerns, certainly the better. And my hope, of course, is that we can do that. We've had these conversations. My hope is we can do that without people losing their homes in the process, and hopefully also maintaining some of the tree canopy there. I mean, there's a buffer between the backside, a small buffer, granted, but a buffer nonetheless between the backside of the homes and the dealership, and I feel like the more we can maintain that buffer, not only would it mitigate some of the noise some of the loss of privacy concerns for residents of the neighborhood, but also some of the noise pollution concerns. So I mean, that's what I've been hearing. It's my understanding that the grade it is going to be higher, so the grade of the alignment will be higher than the grade of the homes, which also is something hope can be addressed. But yeah, let's follow up offline, and I'll get you in touch with folks, because I really, really think it's important that we continue those conversations and mitigate the concerns of the community as much as we possibly can.
Councilmember Newton, the timing is right for that. We were just having some conversations about some of those things, such as the elevation along Summerhill. So the time is pretty good to have those conversations. I know I've been having direct conversations with folks in the neighborhood, and if you would provide me any sort of list that you would like me to reach out, I'll compare that to who I've been talking to, and we can, if there's any gaps, we can continue that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Andy.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. I know Mr. Driggs has another question, but I'm going to ask a question first, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Mr. Newton did clarify one of my questions, that the alignment's pretty much done.
In a broad sense.
Okay.
Yes, at the corridor level, but we're not at the point where we know exactly where stations are going to be, whether it's going to be on one side of the road or another. So we're still working to refine it. But as we're talking about a corridor, the corridor has been established.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're working on LPAs, right?
Well,
Or-
he's saying it's done.
So does that mean that this locally preferred alternative is still under discussion within the corridor?
No.
Or does that mean that you know
So
exactly where the line
the
goes?
LPA is the corridor, the locally preferred alignment.
Has
That's the
been
corridor.
determined.
Okay.
What the team is working on is the details and many of the questions that we're hearing from communities. Where's the station going to be? How high is it going to be? Is it going to be on this side or that side of the road? That is the work that we are progressing on now.
And I think that's where, frankly, we asked this in the last meeting as well, and I think that's where I feel like we're catching up a little bit, because the station work is really just about the fact that the station's going to be on that LPA. The LPA's been determined.
That's correct.
So when we were talking about a ULI study and an APTA peer study, I thought, and maybe some of my committee members thought, what we were talking about is a peer study in a ULI economic development study to determine if the alignment is the best alignment for economic development and for ridership. But that doesn't sound like that's what the purpose of those two studies are. The purpose of those two studies, from what I gather, is now that you've told them where the alignment's going to be, what information can they give you about ridership or economic development, but it doesn't sound like that would inform you all as to whether or not that would be the preferred alignment given that information.
Sure. Typically, I would say you do not perform ULI studies or after peer reviews on corridors. You do that after you've reached a point of design that they can make informed decisions. And so I don't know of a way you can determine ridership if you don't know where the stations are, or you don't. So in order to get the best bang out of that investment, we're giving you pretty specific information on where the corridor lies and where the stations are, and tell us how we can enhance that. To your point, if there is specific quantitative information that says we've gotten a portion of the corridor wrong, or there's a much better alternative, that is not typical, but we would not be able to ignore that. But that's got to be very quantified and very specific, or else we would be subject to legal question, if we change an alignment after it's been identified without having very strong data that points to that change. And so the questions that we've received about economic development, that's why we brought on strategic economics, that group, to take a look at that specific portion, the Trade Street versus 11th Street, and we'll see where the data leads us. But that would require us, in order to make an alignment change, we would have to start the process completely over for that portion of the alignment. The public outreach, all the design, everything.
So I guess that's what I'm still struggling with, because it's like we've led the witness to say this is where the alignment should go, but yet let's take the 11th Street station, which I still can't wrap my head around. If ULI and the APTA do studies on the 11th Street station saying, okay, here's where it's going to go, tell us about ridership, tell us about economic development, they're going to come back with just information, right? They're not going to compare it to anything. But I don't know why they couldn't have been asked to say, what would the difference be in economic development and ridership if you had the 11th Street station 2 blocks from the 9th Street station, or block and a half, versus at the same point? To me, that is pretty specific, and it would present a different number. I don't know if it'd be better or worse with regards to ridership, but I think that's still at the crux of what a lot of people struggle with. I get it's not going to be Uptown. We're not going to tunnel. I think that's over and done. And there's probably no economic development benefit by running it through the middle of Uptown. It's pretty much built out, or, it won't change much. But the ridership number, I think, and you've answered the one about the airport, which I haven't heard all of those reasonings before, but I still struggle with the 11th and 9th, and I thought the purpose of the ULI economic development study and the APTA ridership peer review study would be to say where would be those, what's the best option for stops, not we've already decided where those stops are going to be and we've already decided where the alignment is. Now tell us what we're going to get from that.
And let me clarify that. Typically when you get a ULI or an APTA peer review, you have them for a few days. And so we want to really focus their efforts on a specific area. So to your point, during the Blue Line extension, we had a peer review that came in and moved a station, made suggestions that we do that, and we took that into consideration. So if it's, we believe after they come in and say it would be better a block away or, north, south, east, or west, we think that we can accommodate that through this. That's very different than overviewing the entire alignment.
True.
And so if your concern is about a station location, we believe we can address that in this regard. But if it's, we believe we ought to go through the opposite side of town, that's a major alignment change, and that is typically beyond the ability of a group to come in a couple of days and really make an informed decision on that.
Yeah, and I can understand that for the alignment, because you've given us a lot of information about the airport that we didn't have before. So that helps me with that one. Namely, we're not really looking for public ridership to come in and out of Uptown. It's more about employees of their lines and whatnot. I can go with that. The 11th Street one is still, I think, one that people have concerns over. And if you're saying that you would be open to them saying you're going to be better off putting 9th and 11th Street stops together, then that gives me information that I had not heard before, and I've asked that question.
Sure. The real issue is the difference, and I think what I'm hearing is it's where that station lies. And so to our standard, we're saying it's at 11th, and the group comes back and says, really, you might want to think about putting it at 10th, and we can do that from an engineering standpoint. There's no question that we would be open to that. There's a difference between changing a station and changing a corridor, and that's where we were. Our team, along myself, was concerned about that. So we will absolutely include that as a part of that review and have them look at the 11th Street and Blue Line connection and make a recommendation on that. Ours still will remain the 11th Street at Blue Line, but we would certainly be open to the input from our colleagues on what would be a better.
Wouldn't that require, if they said you need to put them in the same spot, Blue Line's already there, so that can't be moved. Wouldn't that require a tweak, at least in the alignment?
Well, it would depend on where their recommendation would be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Driggs, did you have another question?
I was, for one, going to slightly restate your question. From where we sit, it feels like the decision about the alignment should be informed by the results of some of the research you're talking about. So I guess what we're trying to understand is, what was the basis that caused you to choose the alignment you did without the benefit of that ULI input? We would have thought that would be something that you would want to know about ridership and economic impact.
Sure. Well, those were all part of the study. They were part of the evaluation standpoint. Again, ridership without specific station locations and an alignment, you're just making you're just a guess of what it would be. There really isn't a big difference from a ridership standpoint on an alignment that may move a block or two. You're not going to find a difference in ridership in that. What drives ridership, again, is also what drives economic development, hence the Stonewall example. When the development comes, that changes ridership. And so what we're looking for, particularly in our Uptown stations, are opportunities where that kind of development can occur, which will drive new ridership. And so when we hear some of the other things from the alternative, the corridor was based to maximize ridership, maximize transit-oriented development, which also enhances our ability to attract new riders as development occurs, not in a particular point of time, but over time. The South Corridor opened in 2007. Stonewall didn't develop until 2013, 14. And now that's one of our top 5 ridership generating stations. And so we have to take a look at that, not based on today or at the day of opening, but over that long term, based on the projected development.
I get that, but I think you've got a choice now between where development already has occurred and where it might occur in the future. So I think that idea of putting it out there in order to promote growth is great if you're serving the places where the growth has already happened. But this watch is, sorry. So that to me is kind of the challenge. It feels like there is a highly developed area that is not served by this alignment. Will this alignment actually allow people to walk from the train to the stadium?
Well, we have to also remember we've been focusing on the 11th Street line.
Right.
But it does go across the top through Graham Street between that serving Gateway Station. There will be a station around the current football stadium.
There will be a station, a Moorhead Station, very, very close to the Panther Stadium.
Mm-hmm. And that would also serve what is now the Charlotte Pipe property?
Correct.
Because we're expecting a huge amount of development
Correct. We've been
there.
working closely with the Pipe and Foundry team.
Right.
And we also have to look and remember the Gold Line also makes the east-west connection.
Right.
So I think as we are developing a network, we have to also remember that as our system grows, as our community grows, that one-seat rides are going to be difficult for a lot of people, and that transferring from one line to another will be a part of a new transit culture.
Right. So since I have a reputation to protect, I have to ask about funding. We decided some time ago to commit $50 million to some design and engineering work, right? Are we still on that schedule with those investments?
We are still within the scope of that original investment. And the goals of that investment still are there to create a corridor, to begin preliminary design and get through the environmental process, which will then we would stop if everything remains the same. But all of that work would be protected and could be used at a later date. We need to answer the funding issue before we progress into the project development phase, which is the next step in the federal process, but has a 2-year time limit. Once you enter, you have 2 years to finish and answer and enter into a full funding grant agreement, or else you must start over again.
Right, and that invites a somewhat open-ended question, but there have been media reports about internal correspondence that was released suggesting that the total cost of the mobility plan is probably actually a lot higher than we've been discussing, partly because operating expenses weren't taken into account or whatever. And I know we've kind of reached what I would call a little bit of an impasse right now in terms of recruiting the other towns to join us. So what's your sense of the way forward at this point? Do we have sort of a sequence of events that we can envision that gets us to where we need to be to continue funding the plan?
Sure. Great question. I will answer that from a CAT standpoint. I think this is a broader policy question that others have to weigh in on. But from the beginning of the process, our goal and in working with the MTC was to advance these projects as far as we can, and so that we could be ready. If the funding question was answered, we would be positioned at the front of the federal funding line and not be towards the end. As many of our peer cities are starting to catch up from a transit investment standpoint and a project design, we're starting to fall further and further behind. So it was a leap of faith. I think we had to do this specific for the Silver Line because there were so many other projects, highway projects and others, the bridge in the Gaston County, that really we needed that coordination now to make sure that things didn't happen that would prevent the Silver Line from moving forward into the future. So that was an immediate benefit, but it was a bit of a leap of faith that we wanted to maintain our, what we say, and I will say from a transit standpoint, was a competitive edge when compared to our peer cities nationwide. We wanted to maintain our position ahead of the queue. Every day that goes beyond, there were cities last year that have got funding initiatives and they're moving forward. We want to try and keep that competitive edge. So in that regard, we want to move forward. This is still how we pay for it, is a greater public policy discussion.
You may recall, I've been kind of banging on that for a couple of years.
Sure.
So this is a yes or no question. Do you have ideas, assuming that we didn't get the whole cent sales tax, about how you would phase or otherwise proceed if we're not able to kind of embark on the entire plan with committed funding commitments in hand all at once?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I won't squeeze you any tighter than that. What's that? Well, I knew it.
That was
kind of
intentional,
a can of worms.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Maybe I can quickly jump in there with regards, I think Councilmember Driggs was heading in the direction of what we will share with you on Monday. That will really address a lot of that. So thank you for bringing those questions up. I think it will address the transformation and mobility network, the work we've been asking the consultant to do behind the scenes that are ready in terms of numbers, facing, and really, like John said, it's not just going to be about the silver line, but the blue line, the red line, the gold line. Yeah, so it will be, and it will also have an aspect of the other non-transit pieces, the roadway. So we'll be able to have all of that information. Yes, the buses, yes. Able to yeah, we'll have that. So I think you set it up very well for us for Monday, so we'll be able to answer those questions. Yes,
Okay. Thank you. And I know that Mr. Jaiwoba and I think Mr. Lewis have another meeting to get to, but does anyone else have any other questions that are pressing that we need to have answered now, or do you want to wrap up? If you do, that's fine. I just know that there's a 4 o'clock meeting, so.
I just have a question for John. So there is currently an analysis going on with the I just wanted to know when that will be ready to bring back to TAP, August, September.
The economic development analysis?
Yeah.
Monica Holmes is on the line, I believe, and she is working on that. So, Monica, do you have that?
Yes, so we'll have the information ready for probably the August meeting to bring back. It should be ready by the end of July in time for our July workshops. But I don't exactly know the TAP schedule. So August might be the best. What that analysis is really looking at is it'll do a development potential and yield comparison between 11th Street and Trade Street under the TOD study umbrella.
So, Taiwo, are you using economic development synonymously with economic impact?
Not necessarily. No, they're different. No.
Okay. I just want to clarify. Thank you.
This is a development potential analysis.
So that's something I'd like to program it into your August meeting. If that's okay. All right,
Okay,
thank you.
that'd be great. Thank you, everybody, and I want to acknowledge that Mayor Lyles was on eavesdropping. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for being online for the meeting as well. So I think that's it. That was the only agenda item.
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All in favor, hang up.
Hang up.